Welcome to the Center for Security Policy. My name is Fred Fleitz. I'm a senior fellow with the Center, and I'm joined by Clare Lopez, who is Vice President for Research and Analysis with the Center. Clare, welcome.
Thanks, Fred.
The debate in Washington over what happened when terrorists attacked the U.S. mission at the Benghazi consulate in Libya in September 2012 continues to rage in Washington, and Americans are having difficulty getting answers on what really happened. There was an important development recently when the Citizens Commission on Benghazi put out an important report on what really happened in this tragedy. Now, Clare Lopez was a member of this commission, and I'd like you, Clare, to talk about exactly what is this commission, who is behind it, and what were your major conclusions?
Well, Fred, the commission was formed last year in the middle of 2013, led by Roger Aronoff, who is the editor of AIM, Accuracy in Media, that website, by the way, www.aim.org. And the idea was that as AIM has always been a watchdog on the media, holding the media to account for its reporting, that would be a perfect vehicle to hold not just the media, but also the U.S. government writ large to account for the failure to come to answers, to provide answers to the American people about what really happened at Benghazi, at our mission in Benghazi, and more broadly, what were we doing in Libya intervening in the civil war of 2011 in the first place.
Now, tell me about your top conclusion, including the fact that there was a switch of sides by the U.S. government in the global war on terror.
Well, right. As many know, Muammar Gadhafi was a horrible tyrant and a human rights abuser to his own people. But after about 2004, he had given up his weapons of mass destruction. He saw what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq, did not want to follow in those footsteps, and basically had turned a corner on not providing support to terrorists, as he had done for so many decades previously. Instead, Gaddafi had actually become an ally of the United States and of the West in what used to be called the global war on terror. He was helping to keep Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, in particular, AQIM, to keep it suppressed. And what happened during the Libyan revolt that began in early 2011 is that the United States government at the highest levels somehow decided that Gaddafi had to go, and that in order to accomplish this, the United States government would provide assistance, facilitate the delivery of weapons to jihadist organizations, including the Muslim Brotherhood of Libya and Al-Qaeda.
Now, you also found a Muslim Brotherhood Al-Qaeda chain of command?
Yes, as incredible as that may sound, indeed that's what happened. A lot of the weapons that came into Libya during 2011, destined for the rebels, the Muslim Brotherhood-led, Al-Qaeda-led rebel militia forces, came by way of Qatar. The United Arab Emirates, as it turns out, was the financier, and Qatar served as the hub, the logistics hub, where weapons were loaded onto ships. Those ships then sailed to ports, Libyan ports on the Mediterranean Sea. Well, since the end of March 2011, all of Libyan air and sea space, to the north at least, on the Mediterranean side, all of that space was controlled by NATO. There was a blockade. And so when these ships from Qatar came loaded with weapons, not U.S. weapons, by the way, and mostly small arms, we're talking about automatic rifles, we're talking about RPGs, grenades, and ammunition for the most part, but when those ships laden with weapons came to the port of Benghazi, let's say, they had to be let through the NATO blockade. They were permitted to come through and to deliver those weapons to known members of Al-Qaeda militias and the Muslim Brotherhood. And the U.S. government had officials on the ground, Christopher Stevens among them, who was the official envoy to the Libyan revolt, the Libyan rebels, and CIA as well, on the ground to receive those ships and to help to deliver the weapons into the waiting hands of the Al-Qaeda militias there to get them.
Now, I understand that you found in your investigation that Gaddafi wanted a truce in this conflict, but the Obama administration, or maybe the Europeans, wanted a war. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, you know, when we formed the commission last year, we hoped and invited people who had information about Benghazi to come to us and to talk with us in confidence if they wanted to remain in confidence, otherwise publicly if they would like, about what they knew. And indeed, people did come to us. Among them was a retired Rear Admiral by the name of Charles Chuck Kubik. Chuck Kubik made his career as a Navy Seabee, and later, after he retired as a Rear Admiral, he began a business in engineering and construction, with business across the Middle East, including in Libya, and he had good ties there. And so when the revolt broke out in early 2011, the Libyan contacts that he had, as well as U.S. government contacts, were in touch with Chuck Kubik. And it turns out that the message from the Gaddafi people, directly from Gaddafi's office, the message was that Gaddafi was ready and willing to enter into a 72-hour period of truce under a white flag of truce so that military to military, the two sides could discuss possible abdication and exile by Gaddafi. And so Admiral Kubik was able to put the two sides in contact. He connected his Libyan contacts to AFRICOM, Africa Command, U.S. Africa Command, which was headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany, and whose commander at that time was General Carter Ham. And General Ham's office and Gaddafi's office were in direct telephonic contact towards the end of March 2011, discussing the possibility for such a truce, or such a period of truce for talks. And indeed, even as a sign of his good faith, Gaddafi actually pulled his forces back from a couple of the cities that they were besieging, including Benghazi and Misrata. However, unfortunately, General Ham could never get an okay to proceed with these talks, even though Gaddafi was completely willing to go into them and discuss, obviously with all sincerity, because he'd given the good sign of faith, pulling his forces back. But according to information given to Chuck Kubik from AFRICOM, the decision was made far above, as we were told, the level of AFRICOM itself, that these talks were to cease, they were to stop, and there was no wish to pursue ceasefire talks or truce talks with Gaddafi. A war was underway, and that war would continue.
I assume the major reason for the Citizens Commission is that there are so many unanswered questions about Benghazi, and I know freedom of information requests is something that the Commission has pursued. Can you talk about what isn't known and what needs to be done to answer questions and get a hold of witnesses who know what really happened in this tragedy?
Well, yes. At the press conference that the Citizens Commission on Benghazi held at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C., towards the end of April, just about a week ago on the 22nd, our lawyer on our commission, whose name is John Clark, explained that he has now submitted many dozens, well over 50, FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, to various organizations and agencies within the U.S. government. And those include the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the CIA, the FBI, as well as the Department of State and others. And to date, unfortunately, or at least as of last week, no response forthcoming. Some of those requests are well past their due date. Others are still pending, but no information has been received so far. What kind of information we're looking for? Well, we're asking, for instance, what are the contacts that liaison to the rebels, Christopher Stevens, had with different members of the rebellion. For instance, we know that the Muslim Brotherhood of Libya was the political leadership of the rebellion. The Transitional National Council, as it was called, led by Mustafa Jalil and Mahmoud Jibril. Those are the top Muslim brothers in Libya. And they headed up the TNC, as it was called. The Al-Qaeda militias were under their command, actually, their command and control. And so we wanted to know what kinds of contacts there were among and between them and Christopher Stevens, between Christopher Stevens and different al-Qaeda militias, for instance, militias headed up by, let's say, Abdul Hakim Belhaj, who became the military commander of Tripoli after the war. He was Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, an al-Qaeda franchise member prior to that. Abu Sufyan bin Kumu, a former jihadi who fought, I shouldn't say former, he's still a jihadi, who fought in Afghanistan formerly and later on headed up a brigade and later a militia, and those were folded into something eventually called Ansar al-Sharia. And Abu Sufyan bin Kumu was a former inmate, a detainee at Guantanamo Bay. What were the contacts between him and Christopher Stevens? So these kinds of questions. Also, what kinds of military forces were in the region, obviously on a commemorative date as serious as 9/11, September 11, 2012 is the date of this attack on our Benghazi mission, and we all know how al-Qaeda likes very often to choose dates like that to launch other attacks. So, you know, what military forces were put on alert pending this commemorative date? How close were they? Where were they? How many were they? For instance, we know recently that Eli Lake published a very interesting piece in the Daily Beast in which he talked about one of the former U.S. training camps near Tripoli, Libya, where Green Berets, special forces, were operating in the period during 2012 and actually right up through the attack of September 11, 2012. Why weren't those forces called upon when the attack unfolded in Benghazi? Why hasn't anybody talked about these special forces as being available? Nobody talked about them. Nobody mentioned them until these various media reports. So these are the kinds of questions that the FOIA requests address.
Claire, thank you very much for this information. This is a very important report. Can you tell our viewers where they can find it?
Yes, the website is www.aim.org. That is AIM for Accuracy in Media, and there is a tab at that website for the Citizens Commission on Benghazi.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you for watching.